And Elaine will explain more about that in a second. For the benefit of those of you who did not see our announcement, I will start with simply rereading the announcement for this webinar, especially to help those who are watching it after the live showing. The webinar was titled VERGE, at the intersection of sustainability and high tech. As part of its annual year-end survey of influencers and partners, VERGE recently asked the question, what technology or development makes you hopeful for sustainability in the year ahead? Here's what experts in clean energy, transportation systems, and emerging technologies believe could take flight. The rise of electrification of cars, trucks, and buses in combination with an increasingly cleaner power grid was a common refrain amongst most other inspiring market-driven actions in energy, cities, water, buildings, and even solutions via emerging tech such as blockchain, machine learning, and artificial intelligence hold promise in 2018 and beyond. This webinar will explore how, in an interconnected world, technology is accelerating sustainability solutions. Elaine Hsieh is director of the VERGE program for GreenBiz Group, leading the global event series that focuses on how technology accelerates sustainability solutions across cities and industries, including energy, buildings, transportation, supply chains, and agriculture. She has almost 20 years experience consulting with Fortune 500 companies on sustainability, green building, and technology issues. Elaine has a solid technical background with understanding of the energy, construction, biotech, education, retail, manufacturing, and finance industries. She's been featured in Mashable, Green Economy Post, Reuters, The Guardian, and other publications for her social media influence within the green building business and sustainability communities. And now you know why it's such a special treat to have Elaine with us today. I will add that this is the second favor Elaine has done for me in my sustainable business course at Fordham University last semester. Elaine also did a wonderful visit, and I said, let's do it again. And thankfully, Elaine agreed, and here she is. Welcome to the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium community, primarily teaching faculty and sustainability directors at universities. And what we're going to do today is a little bit different than our normal webinar. We're going to keep it in a Q&A mode throughout, and then open it up for the usual Q&A with the audience. Most of you who are online will be able to see the chat box where I've asked you to put your questions and comments for Elaine in the chat box as we proceed. So let me ask this. Can those who are online actually see us with the webcams, or can you only see the placeholder screen? I'll wait for someone to type a message in the chat box and see if only the placeholder screen. Well, that's not what we had in mind, but what I will do is I will put something better than the placeholder screen up there, and we will okay. Are we now seeing, I'll ask the audience again. Yes, they are seeing something. So with that positive feedback, we'll launch into it. So Elaine, although I referred to the VERGE program why don't you give your more detailed take on why there is a Verge program, what the goals of the program are. And I know it's been a very successful venture that you've been leading, but there's a lot more to it than I've mentioned so far. So why don't you start?
Thanks, Ira. So I'm honored to be part of this group. I'm generally not in front of a lot of higher education professionals, so thanks for attending this webinar. To answer your question, Ira, related to the what is Verge? So I work for a company called GreenBiz Group. We are a global media and events company that is focused on the intersection of business, technology, and sustainability, actually business sustainability and innovation for the most part. And so Verge is a subset of something that we do, and I can go a little bit further into what GreenBiz does in general. But to answer your initial question, which is what is Verge? So Verge was created to accelerate the clean economy. Really, it's a conference and expo right now, but it's also kind of permeated into editorial coverage and a number of other arms of things that we can do to constantly create the momentum and build and accelerate impact. So in this case, you know, as you were mentioning in the introduction, it's about the intersection of technology and sustainability, and specifically how technology is enabling the acceleration of more systemic solutions. So as higher education professionals, you probably know that everything is interconnected. And so in this case, you know, really helping people understand that, you know, when you have a lot more data, you have a lot more transparency, you start to understand the interconnectedness of how there are consequences whenever you do one thing in your design or one thing in your market model or whatever. Things become much more intertwined, and it becomes much more transparent in terms of understanding how to dig into the challenges at a more systemic level, meaning how do you bridge, independent of sector or industry, how do you deal with the challenge that's actually the root of the problem? Generally, we're seeing a lot of really interesting things happening that technology is enabling. And so that's what we focus on at Verge. We bring in people from energy, buildings, transportation, supply chains, manufacturing, food systems, water systems. And we talk a lot about things like circular economy concepts and other things like that. So generally, I can tell you about Verge as a platform. So basically, as a platform and a conference and expo for, as we say, accelerating the clean economy, the format is such that we are highly interactive. The events generally attract people from, I would say, you know, the majority of our audience is corporate. So from the private sector, many people who are not necessarily just chief sustainability officers, but rather there's a lot of people who are not in sustainability at all, specifically people who are in charge of data or innovation or strategy or finance or even resilience or security issues or or their investors or startups, et cetera. So there's that. And then there's also about a third of our audience is from a subnational government, i.e. local governments such as cities, states, regions, municipalities, et cetera. And it's global in scope. Generally, we have a fall event in the Bay Area, which is our flagship event. I'm based in Oakland, California, in the Bay Area. And then we also have a June event, a couple weeks before your SCC faculty event, June 12th through 14th in Honolulu, called Virg Hawaii. Now, Virg Hawaii is a slightly different animal because we were hired by the Hawaii State Energy Office to take over their Asia Pacific Clean Energy Summit to help them achieve their 100% renewable electricity mandate by 2045. And in addition, last December, the mayors across those islands committed to 100% renewable ground transportation for both public and private ground transportation by 2045, and their fleets 100% renewable by 2035. So they have aggressive decarbonization goals for their transportation systems as well as their energy systems. And they are leveraging Verge as an event platform to be able to bring together all those people, the policymakers, the utility executives, the community leaders, the private sector people, indigenous communities, et cetera, to tackle some of the hard problems, technical problems, model problems, aligning incentive, finance problems, et cetera. So what we do is we have keynotes, and we have breakouts, and we have workshops, and we have invite-only facilitated working sessions called summits. And this all comes together with where we create this structured serendipity to accelerate impact. That's it. I can tell you about the origin story, but for the most part, that's pretty much the high level.
Well, we may need to get into the origin story, because what I was going to ask you next is, I specifically recall when GreenBiz launched VERGE, and I was in touch with Joel McCower, the head of GreenBiz, and remarked what an interesting approach that was to focus on the intersection of sustainability and technology. And VERGE is distinct from the normal, let's call it, GreenBiz events. And so there must have been a very, very good reason why GreenBiz decided to put so much focus on the scope that's represented in VERGE. So maybe you could share a little bit of the genesis story, and as a way of explaining why is this intersection of sustainability and technology so important to GreenBiz that it merits its own initiative.
Right. So GreenBiz as a whole, let's back up a little bit. So GreenBiz as a whole has 4 arms of business as a media and events company. We do greenbiz.com, which is our editorial talking about, the hows and whys around why businesses or communities, cities, et cetera, should be looking at specific kinds of sustainability solutions across a number of different kinds of industries. Historically, GreenBiz was co-founded by Joel McCower, as you said, one of your friends. He's the executive editor, and the base of GreenBiz originally was, had sustainability executives at corporations, companies, right? So it's really mostly focused on sustainability in the business world. But what happened was in 2010 or so, the company brought in a new CEO, Eric Ferreau. He is not a co-founder. However, his background is heavily in the technology sector, technology and media. And he organized a lot of events. You guys may have heard of Web 2.0 or Interop or things like that. Those are gigantic technology conferences. And he sort of brought a lot of this network related to technology. And Joel brought this whole network of people who dealt with sustainability. And so it was where tech meets sustainability, and that became the brainchild of VERGE. And VERGE, so, in the 4 arms of business, we have the editorial, which is the blog site, which is actually the highest traffic site related to sustainability in the business world, but has expanded since then. We also have research that's generally sponsored. For example, we just did a corporate renewable energy procurement paper that was you can download it for free. We also did a report on circular economy in water systems called Circular Water. And that is really interesting for the private sector, especially as they work on water resource issues and water innovation. And then in addition to the research arm, we have the GreenBiz Executive Network. Now that is a subscription-based network of about 80 of the top chief sustainability officers of companies that are $1 billion or more revenue. And it's really kind of a Chatham House rule community of people who can get together and help support each other. They all play similar roles across different industries, but that sort of helps each other. So in the event side, we have an event that's focused on those corporate sustainability professionals called GreenBiz, as Ira was saying. It's usually in February in Phoenix. We have lots of partnerships with WBCSD and a lot of the different folks like UN Global Compact, all those folks, GRI, et cetera. They focus on things like corporate sustainability reporting and ESG data and a number of things related to supply chain, especially in the social side, communications and marketing and branding, some circular economy concepts as well. But for the most part, it's a community of people who are very similar. It's a homogenous community of people who are getting together to support each other. And so on the opposite side, our other event, which VERGE formed around, when Eric came in, he was like, we need to expand this ecosystem. So if you bring in all of this innovation and these technology people who generally don't necessarily think about doing the technology for accelerating sustainability. And the sustainability people who don't necessarily understand where technology is going, or a lot of these really interesting things that they could tap into to help them do their jobs better and really accelerate their impact. Then you have a really interesting very diverse group of people who don't necessarily, it's not preaching to the choir. It's a completely new choir. A lot of experts like Amory Lovins and folks like that who have graced our stage multiple times, they're not necessarily known in our entire audience. It's new to people, and the whole point of sustainability to me is diversity, right? Bringing in that diverse ecosystem creates more impact. And so the whole intent of Verge, as it was formed in 2011, it was an invite-only roundtable push-to-talk mics, and just having discussions with, I was having a discussion as a green building expert back then. I attended the invite-only one in San Francisco, and there was one in Shanghai, and there was one in London. And basically, we just had conversations. I was across from the CEO of PG&E and the CEO of Autodesk and the CEO and the transportation people. And I had never had FaceTime with the people who were dealing with issues that were either obstructive to me, or we could create new models. And so actually having that face-to-face time with people who you don't necessarily get to intersect with, but are highly dependent on the consequences of each other's actions, was really powerful. So then in 2012, we decided to become public, a public-facing event, conference and expo. And so that we went DC, and we went around world, Sao Paulo and Paris, and a number of different places, as well as the Bay Area. And then I joined in 2013 to take over Verge, because I had such a diverse amount of experience in many different sectors that Verge covered. And so from then, when I took over in 2013 for Verge, we started to really embrace the whole food, energy, water nexus idea, which is that we're bringing people from every single one of those industries, and they're not necessarily talking to each other, but they're trying to solve for the same problem. So then Verge became framed around, it's all about systems thinking. So that's kind of the seed of what happened, and it's just expanded since then. And then also in 2013, we started building our own 100% renewably powered microgrid to power our entire conference. So we build that in less than a day with off-the-shelf equipment, and that sort of demonstrates how we're walking the talk with, how you create more resilient and secure and interoperable systems for, very little finance needs, or some new financial opportunities that come out, or showing people that, the power of virtual reality or AI or blockchain or things like that. We'll do that in addition to having these collaboration discussions on public-private partnership agreements and new models for thinking in the clean energy transition, or different kinds of synergies that are occurring with infrastructure transition. Does that help?
Helps greatly. Thank you for that detailed overview of not only Verge, but the full GreenBiz landscape. It represents a wealth of resources that ought to be useful for teaching faculty. And speaking for myself, I've used GreenBiz and Verge resources extensively in my courses, and it raises the prospect that the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium audience is another stakeholder group that could benefit greatly from inclusion in GreenBiz events and tapping into GreenBiz resources. So, for example, I've suggested in our prior conversations, Elaine, that the recaps of Verge events on the GreenBiz website and the post on the Verge blog, including your own insightful posts, these are examples that could be introduced in courses, can inform modules, learning outcomes, syllabi, etc., all for the benefit of teaching faculty. One in particular that I alluded to in the introduction that I wanted to ask you about, because I think it provides a great snapshot of where the sustainability technology interface is at the moment. My understanding is you did at the end of last year a survey about what are going to be the most significant items in 2018, and I thought you might be able to recall for us what several of those categories were, again, because that will help our audience understand the types of examples that they might introduce to their students.
Okay, great. Yeah, so last year, as Iris said, we conducted a survey of the, I would say, most influential people that have been part of Verge. So either speakers or advisory board folks or whatever, people who are generally on the cutting edge of solutions that are actually gaining traction in the marketplace. So the things that we look at Verge are things right around the corner, but not nascent. Because if something is really crazy and strange that isn't really getting as much traction as it should, i.e., you know, Hyperloop or something, maybe that's just way too nascent, and you know, that's not necessarily something that we're going to focus on. We're really going to talk about things that are actually financially and economically, sort of economically viable, as well as there's the economics around all the different factors that are influencing different industries are kind of converging in a place where this is something we want to signal to our audience that this is something that's real, that you really need to address. So anyway, we surveyed a bunch of people last year, December 2017, and we got about 17 responses, and specifically they're experts from large corporations and utilities and some universities, NGOs, investors, and even innovation incubators. And basically the themes that we saw that came out were, you know, the acceleration of transportation electrification. So specifically, I would say, you may be aware of the fact that, you know, a lot of people are pushing for decarbonization, and the easiest way to essentially get to 100% renewables in many people's minds and a lot of experts is to electrify everything. So the idea is that you would electrify your transportation infrastructure, your transportation sources, as well as your building energy as well. And so then once you get all that on the grid, and the grid becomes cleaner and cleaner as it is across the world right now because of the economics of things, et cetera, then you start to decarbonize much faster. You're less dependent on fossil fuels. And so, you know, there's a lot of technical issues around that in terms of some of the conversion of other kinds of energy sources, but for the most part, that's where the world is going. And so it's a very hopeful area because the economics of batteries, as well as solar panels and a number of other renewable type of technologies or clean energy technologies, the cost is going down super, super fast. And so, and you know, it helps that China is investing a lot in renewables as well as batteries. They're pushing, you know, to phase out the internal combustion engine all over the world now, especially in China. It's really driving a lot of interesting volume that is creating a lot of supply, which is driving down the costs. So that's a really interesting area, and a lot of people are very interested in that. Everyone from Obvious Ventures, which is a VC firm that does world positive investing, UC, Office of the President, University of California, Office of the President, head of sustainability, you know, saw that as a very interesting. The EV adoption is starting to take off, especially in California. Elizabeth Fredheim, who is the Senior Director of Supply Chain Sustainability at Walmart, she works on advanced transportation. She saw that as a really interesting place, especially with the potential benefits of lower fuel costs and new kinds of trucks that they're designing to be lightweight, autonomous, connected, et cetera. Mark Wallace, who's head of global engineering and sustainability at UPS, is seeing a lot of really cool innovation as a result of the transportation electrification. And then a number of other folks, LA and a number of areas of that. And then another area that we're seeing that's really hopeful from our survey is just the market-driven clean energy and innovation that's occurring. So as I said before, the clean energy transition is coming at us very quickly. And it's not even necessarily because people want to be clean. It's because the economics are driving these things. To invest in clean energy is locking in a much lower cost than actually being dependent on oil and gas. And the economics of that are really just driving the private sector. And so, you know, really that's the reason why, you know, Exxon wants to be competitive in the marketplace, the global marketplace, and wanted Trump to stay in the Paris Agreement. I mean, there's a number of different reasons why private sector is on board with the clean energy transition, and it has a lot to do with money. And it's great that we're seeing that groundswell and momentum, but the market is driving this demand. So that's really cool in that it's becoming greener for us. And so policies, you're starting to see potential prices on carbon, et cetera, that are really helping that out. So utilities from New York, Con Edison to the, World Resources Institute to the Energy Innovation, GE Ventures, a number of different groups like that in Brazil, Google, et cetera. You're seeing actually also what Verge does is we co-host a shoulder event that's the annual summit for the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance. And that is a consortium of BSR's Future of Internet Power, Rocky Mountain Institute's Business Renewable Center, WRI and WWF's Corporate Renewable Energy Buyers Principles Group. That's bringing together 400 of the world's largest corporate renewables buyers from the private sector, that is, who are driving the market for renewables. No longer is it necessarily the utilities or governments that are buying this energy. It's really the private sector that's driving this, and that's our primary audience. And so it made a lot of sense to convene this group at Verge as well. And then also things like the circular economy or more equity and inclusion, that technology can be used for good or ill, but for the most part, people are understanding that if you don't lift all boats, that you don't include those that are disenfranchised or those that don't have access to the internet or education or things like that, then the entire world suffers. And so people are starting to understand that actually technology is making that much more transparent. And there are some really great opportunities where you're starting to reinvent business models, market models, processes, design. There's so much interesting stuff just in contract manufacturing alone, in the manufacturing of products. We're even seeing circular economy concepts in fast fashion, in plastics packaging, in the way that people do business in general. Companies as large as Walmart and IKEA and Unilever and Google have signed up to do more circular economy applications. So that's another area of real interest. So that was the summary.
Well, that was a great overview, and you anticipated some of my other questions along the lines of what specific topics should educators think about including in, if they were to create, for example, a module on the intersection of technology and sustainability within a broader sustainability course. In your last comment, you covered examples from transportation, from clean energy, and circular economy. Are there any other big ticket items, so to speak, that ought to be on the radar screen of faculty in thinking about what to include in a module or their curriculum if they want to present an accurate perspective on sustainability and technology for their students?
Well, I mean, the most influential markets the most influential and dynamic markets right now are in energy, transportation, and mobility, and circular economy. So we actually have our Verge event, our flagship in Oakland this October, specifically structured that way. We have 3 concurrent conferences: Verge Energy, Verge Transport, and Verge Circular. But in addition to that, we're seeing a lot of really interesting things that technology is creating in terms of say, for example, the application of blockchain technology. So that's a digital ledger that helps kind of create this highly distributed, trustworthy network without an intermediary, of different kinds of transactions. And it doesn't have to be Bitcoin oriented. It's really just using the blockchain ledger platform for clean energy transactions at the distributed scale. And there's also things like food safety issues. So Walmart and a number of other large companies are investing in blockchain solutions for food safety, because frankly, when you go through so many intermediaries, you don't really know where your food's coming from and you don't know how safe it is. And so just from a sourcing standpoint, it's actually a much more efficient model. You don't have to go through a lot of different intermediaries. And so that's a really interesting technology that we're seeing really gaining ground with corporations, in addition to the clean energy side, which is really significant internationally right now from an energy blockchain standpoint. You're starting to see utilities investing much more in that area. In addition, we're starting to see things like machine learning and artificial intelligence being used from everything from ocean conservancy and, saving marine systems to data center efficiency. So Google, they use their Google Brain technology on their data centers, and within days, they were able to get way more efficiencies than manually they were able to gain over the previous decades. And so you're starting to see, how the power of how technology can actually do things much better than what humans do. And so there's that, but there's also the downside, which is the challenge of technology, especially like AI or machine learning, is that when you have inputs that are inequitable, i.e. if you don't bring in people who are women, people of color, different socioeconomic classes to create the inputs for learning for a lot of these technologies, then the decisions that these machines make could be for ill. So there's a lot of ethical things that are going here, as well as the challenges around equity and inclusion and resilience and security. And so, anything that becomes more digitized, as in infrastructure transition right now with energy, transportation, buildings, et cetera, as everything gets more connected, you've got to deal with cybersecurity and a number of other kinds of things that, are creating a more open system and also potentially more nefarious. So there's that aspect of things too, which is the resilience piece. That's really key. There are a number of other areas too, in buildings and infrastructure, et cetera, but I think that the key ones are those.
That's great. I think you've given the audience a lot of great ideas. The main themes that are out there in sustainability and technology, especially with your mention of machine learning and blockchain. I can add on the blockchain side that I'm part of a new network called the Climate Chain Coalition, which includes representatives from more than 70 organizations that are building applications on the blockchain to address climate change. And that's just a small slice of what's happening with sustainability-oriented approaches using blockchain technology. And you also said something important in passing there about blockchain that I think is helpful for faculty members. In the popular press, when people hear about blockchain, it's generally been some unsettling news at times about Bitcoin. And you've pointed out that there's more to blockchain than Bitcoin, and it is really making a difference. So that's one myth that I think you've exploded here today. Another one that maybe you could say a few more words about, because I don't think everyone is familiar with it, is you've mentioned circular economy a few times, and maybe you can explain why that, at least in the view of many, is not just another buzzword or fad.
Yeah, so, you guys may be familiar with, cradle to cradle, or, the kind of typical models for how our supply chains work, or the life cycle of a product, or things like that. So circular economy is essentially a phrase or a meme that was started by Ellen MacArthur. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with her, but she has the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. It's actually, she sailed around the world and saw a lot of pollution in the ocean, and there were a number of other things that she witnessed that helped her conceive of this idea of reinventing the way that we consume things, but then also the way that we look at things, or the way that we do business, or the way that we kind of live on this planet. And so she created this whole idea of the circular economy, which is a regenerative system, which you have resource input and waste and emission and energy leakage, and they're all minimized by slowing and closing and narrowing energy and material loops. So you can do that through long-lasting design, maintenance, repair, reuse, remanufacturing, refurbishing, closed recycling loops, et cetera. There's demanufacturing, there's there's so many different ways of localizing, but also continuing to have not just materials, but also processes continue in a cycle where they're constantly adding value rather than being devalued. So different than I would say that Cradle to Cradle is a subset of circular economy, but for the most part, it's taking that, take, make, waste concept and blowing it out and making it regenerative. There is the opportunity to be innovative in that approach as you iterate. But we are seeing it across design and materials. We're seeing it across food and water systems, logistics and infrastructure, and business model innovation. So for example, Steelcase, that furniture company that does, really beautiful office furniture, they took 5 years reinventing their entire business around the circular economy by applying circular economy principles into the way that they do business. And the way that they manufacture and used to kind of consume furniture with their clients. And they created furniture as a service. They created new apps. They basically doubled their revenue in the next year after they had created the circular economy model for their business. Which is, one example of how you can apply that not just at a design side, but really at the business model side. We're also seeing lots of things related to like urban biocycles or regenerative ag or water tech or reverse logistics or, the sharing economy. So anyway, hopefully that helps.
Well, just in the end there, you threw out another bunch of critical phrases that faculty need to make their students aware of, because those are the emerging trends that are going to frame sustainability during their students' careers, which is the primary reason why this whole subject matter area of the intersection of technology and sustainability is, I believe, of critical importance to those teaching in the sustainability and higher education space. I do have one question that came in that asks you to speculate about the traditional stakeholder groups that have been involved in VERGE and GreenBiz activities. Do you see a role for business and industry who have attended your events to help provide input to sustainability programs in academia as to what they are looking for in graduates coming out of these programs? In other words, what are they looking for as sustainability background, skills, knowledge, attributes in new graduates who become their employees?
So it depends on what your students are, like what kind of role they're seeking. So VERGE, so there's the GreenBiz audience, which is generally, corporate sustainability professionals. And so they specifically are working in an internal position. Many of them don't have any budget, barely have any staff, and they have to work in an integrated fashion and essentially be internal champions for change. There are other organizations like Unilever or, Campbell Soup Company or, other places like that, which have, McDonald's, Walmart, et cetera. There's more integrated, there's higher budgets. It's much more integrated across the entire business. There's a lot of top down, championing related to green initiatives and doing things for good, in addition to obviously for profit. And those organizations are going to already inherently look for people who have a sustainability background or have sustainability oriented experience. But for the most part, I would say that a lot of young people coming out of school already are mission oriented. And so, employers are trying to attract new talent by, providing the opportunities for a lot of these young people to see themselves staying there. And so their background, you can come in at any different level as long as you're providing a culture and opportunities for these young people to do what they want to do, to accomplish what they want to accomplish. Interestingly, last weekend, I was at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business, keynoting at the Climate Cap Summit, which is the first conference that they've had for global MBA students at the nation's, like about 16 different business schools. Many of those business students have never talked about sustainability or climate in terms of their curriculum. So they're coming at it from a slightly different angle, where, you know, you've got normally like a master's of engineering or environmental management group, you know, from the environment school or sustainability programs, et cetera, that usually are constantly talking about sustainability, things like what I'm talking about, and their headspace is in systems thinking and, you know, the food, energy, water nexus and all that kind of stuff. But all these MBAs were basically talking about business risk, pricing, economic opportunities, tariff structures, a lot of quant-oriented stuff. And so when they were hearing about, you know, there's one quote basically saying, you know, you hear a lot, everybody's talking about automation is super disruptive, but I'm realizing that climate change is just as disruptive. And I hadn't really thought about it that way. And now I get it. And so it's interesting where if you look at a sustainability person, they don't necessarily think about things in terms of business terms, which is what is the economic opportunity? How can I broaden my impact? How do I get to know my audience better in order to get them to advocate for me to do what I need to do from a sustainability standpoint? Those are the skills that a sustainability professional needs in order to get anything done. You're going to have to, you know, really understand and empathize with how to talk to your CFO, how to talk to your global supply chain folks, how to talk to the people who are actually making the decisions, have the budgets, and are going to control the impact of what your company is going to accomplish. So, you know, if you can do that, a lot of my advice to people who want to get into sustainability is get into a job where you actually understand how to do the job rather than do sustainability reporting. That's a thing that you can learn. It's more about how do you gain the empathy and the experience. Obviously, you could gain the empathy through the experience in the operational areas of a company. How do you start to understand what the customer wants, or, you know, how the distribution side works, or how the supply chain flows, or, you know, there are just a lot of different opportunities for you to really start to understand how to do the work. And then you can advocate for making it better from a more sustainable standpoint.
That was a great answer. I mean, I think those are wonderful insights for faculty to take on board to understand what current graduates are really looking for in their sustainability education. I have a few other stray comments here. I encourage others who are still on the line to post their questions and comments in the chat box, but an easy one that I think we can use to begin to wrap up, Elaine, is a couple people are asking, what is if you had to name one example or one post that you've written about, or something that's on the Verge blog that just blows you away every time you think about it, what would be the coolest thing that you can share with us? Maybe something you've already mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I hate these questions where it's like, what's the one thing that blows you away? I mean, there's so many things. So, and honestly, when you deal with this kind of space where you're looking at changes in the markets, honestly, the thing that's so exciting to me is the amount of economic opportunity there is. So everyone's saying like doom and gloom, climate change, business risk, adaptation, you know, a number of different things that are cautionary tales. But what we do is we frame things around solutions. So if you look at you know, greenbiz.com in aggregate, and especially the ones, articles that are technology oriented or labeled as Verge or whatever, all of them present some really amazing technologies. Everything from, you know, very basic technology to save coral reefs, or to eliminate plastic in the ocean, or to you know, understand what is going to be reducing more fossil fuels in a renewables deal, or how to do renewables deals in aggregate if you don't have hardly any money and you can't incur that risk, or some policy that's really just changing the paradigm for an entire government. Or the connection of autonomous, connected, shared, and electrified, and the fact that one of our Verge speakers, Robin Chase, she created the kind of shared mobility principles for cities, because we're realizing that ride hailing and Uber and Lyft and all that stuff creates more congestion in cities. So there's this whole future shared mobility principles that cities are signing on to try to figure out how to subsidize or incentivize urban transportation where people are sharing autonomous vehicles or sharing ride hailing or doing things where mass transit is the best option, or bicycling, or walking. How is smart growth playing into this? All of it is solutions oriented. So frankly, I see it in aggregate, which is there's so much inspiration to take from greenbiz.com, because everything is about what's working. It's not about be careful of this, be careful of that, because that frames the challenge. But then, so the substantive aspect is really, what are you going to do with it? What's the new opportunity? How do you partner with others to get it done faster? That's what I take inspiration from.
Excellent. And again, all of these things that you've mentioned throughout the webinar are great examples to build into sustainability coursework. And when you say greenbiz.com, so that everyone is clear, within greenbiz.com website, there are various Verge pages. I don't know if there is a specific one that you want to call out, Elaine, for people to go.
Yeah, we're going to restructure things later, but I think for now, just look at greenbiz.com, because a lot of the articles are related to what I'm saying. And interesting, like I see this question about what is the biggest roadblock for speedy implementation of sustainability technologies. So the short answer of that is that, no single company or, organization can do things alone to speed up a technology. And so what we're seeing is this pre-competitive coalitions that are being created or have been created. So, there's a Sustainable Apparel Coalition where it started with Walmart and Patagonia, and, totally opposite kinds of retail companies come together. And then so many other of those companies it just brought all the other companies in. And now they work together to have a standardization of their supply chains across the entire apparel world. Same thing happened for food waste, standardizing the sell by, use by dates so that it's not so confusing. So they get rid of like 40% of the food waste in their supply chains across all these different massive food companies. Or the renewable energy buyers principles, aggregating models so that you can buy renewables for cheaper and faster and really just accelerate renewables across the marketplace and driven by the private sector. All of these things are happening with people who are competing with each other, organizations that compete with each other, because they see that if they work together in a collaborative effort, they get change done faster across an industry. Sustainable fuel buyers principles, which actually is the fuel buying power of the largest companies that do transportation, making it much more clean. And so and then infrastructure changes as a result. So all these things are not led by the technology, but by the demand and the marketplace and the economics. And so that's how you're going to drive acceleration.
I think that's a great place to end. I thank you, Elaine. And again, apologies to all for the technical glitches at the beginning. We were attempting to experiment in a slightly different way with our GoToMeeting platform, and we didn't exactly pull it off cleanly, but I think what resulted was a wonderful conversation with Elaine Hsieh, and I think we all benefited from that. Elaine, thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon to share some wonderful insights at the intersection of sustainability and technology with our audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you.